When the alien princes turned to ash, he gathered every particle. The ash didn't fall like snow. It floated, hung, shimmered faintly in the low gravity, each particle dancing in the stillness of the ruined planet like stardust suspended in. Morning. Yalan stood alone on the cracked surface, his boots barely stirring the silent, silver-gray powder that covered the ground in soft drifts. The world was dead. It had died in flame and heat and screams, in the rupture of tectonic plates and the howling wind that followed orbital bombardments. And somewhere in that agony and that final defiance against her people's extinction, the alien princess had turned to ash. She had chosen to stay, to refuse evacuation, to make her stand alongside the elders of her kind as the sky tore open with fire. Yalan had begged her, pleaded, screamed across comm channels as tremors split the capital's towers in two. But she had only smiled with that calm, ancient grace of hers and whispered, "If they take my body, let them never take my soul." Then the transmission had ended. That was 6 standard days ago, and now he was here alone, not sent, not ordered. He had commandeered a salvage pod, hacked the approach vector, and braved the orbital debris field without clearance. The brass wouldn't have permitted it anyway. No one wanted to return to Calitha 4. It was condemned, poisoned, declared a non-recoverable cultural loss. But she wasn't just a culture. She wasn't a line in a treaty report or a footnote in a conquest. She was his, and she was here. Or at least what remained of her. Yalan had seen what remained of cities' temples reduced to soot, archives to slag. But it was the silence that screamed the loudest. There were no birds left, no shimmer beetles, no temple choirs practicing their harmonic rites. Just ash and, ruins and echoes of things too sacred for war. She had believed in peace until the last. Even when the human alliance demanded mineral rights and planetary pledges. Even when she stood in front of their war councils, speaking of coexistence while admirals calculated invasion windows behind false smiles. And Yalan, a translator at first, a liaison second, had stood beside her through all of it, watching her stand against the inevitable. Somewhere in the middle of all those councils and conflicts, he had fallen in love. Not the human kind? Not the quick-burning kind born of adrenaline and shared rooms. No, the kind that threads through atoms. The kind that endures silence. That sees another soul and knows this is the thing I will break for, bleed for, burn for. And now he was here, gathering her, not in body. That was gone, scattered across the ruins of her ancestral palace, reduced to carbon and cosmic dust. But the particles, the residue, the motes that still lingered, those were hers. Her essence hadn't left completely. Not yet, not if he moved quickly. Not if he stayed gentle. He knelt in the ruins of the courtyard, where he'd last held her hand and opened the containment vial specially adapted to preserve unstable molecular structures. Around him, the ash drifted like memories. He extended a gloved hand and let the dust settle into the sample funnel. His fingers trembled, not from radiation or temperature or fear. From reverence. "I told you I'd come," he whispered. His voice cracked, but the air didn't carry it far. The planet swallowed sound now like it had swallowed light. The containment vial chirped 1.3% capacity. He exhaled shakily. This would take time, days maybe. The human navy would trace his flight eventually, maybe even send a retrieval team to bring him back or detain him for desertion. He didn't care. He pitched a small tent beside the shattered columns and activated the environmental dome. The moment it sealed, he pulled off his helmet and inhaled stale, filtered air. He let the vial hover beside him, drawing in more of the sacred dust. She had called him by a name no one else used, Jalanar. She said it meant keeper of light in her tongue, though he suspected the translation was poetic rather than literal. He remembered her laughing once, the kind of laugh that rippled through her translucent throat ridges and glowed faintly beneath her skin. It had embarrassed him the first time. Later he would have killed to hear it again. But there was nothing left to kill, nothing left to save, only to honor. On the second day, he ventured deeper into the palace ruins, careful not to disturb what remained. He traced the floor mosaic of the twin stars, now cracked and dulled. This was where she had been crowned. And here, yes, here was the sanctum of names, where generations of her lineage had carved their stories into crystalline panels, all shattered now, names erased by fire. He gathered the dust carefully, cataloging each region. Not for science. For remembrance, the vial clicked again 5.9%. That night he dreamed of her not as she died, but as she once was, seated in the garden atrium beneath the light fronds, her skin glowing silver blue, her hands tracing symbols in the air as she explained her people's myth of soul dispersion. "We don't believe in endings," she had said, gazing upward. "We believe in returning. A particle cannot be destroyed. It can only change state." When he woke, he sobbed quietly into his suit's sleeve, hoping the audio dampeners held. On the third day, a storm rose. Not of weather Calither IV's atmosphere was barely functional now, but magnetic turbulence from the planet's wounded core stirred the dust into swirls. For hours he sat within his dome, watching her essence dance in the wind. Then, slowly, he walked into the storm, let the particles cling to him. Let her remember him. He spoke to her as he walked, nonsense things, fragments of memory, his favorite Earth song, the time she had teased him for not understanding her sacred gestures, the way she used to tilt her head when pondering a difficult question. He didn't expect an answer, but the wind calmed as he finished, as if in response. The vial glowed 14.2%. He set up a second container. There was so much of her in the soil, in the windswept hollows of broken temples, in the stone grooves of collapsed altars. On the fourth day he found her crown, blackened, warped, buried beneath rubble but intact. A circlet of woven metal and memory, with crystal inlays scorched but unshattered. He carried it back to the dome in both hands, kneeling before it like a relic, and perhaps it was. Not just hers, theirs, a symbol of what they'd almost built. That night he engraved her name in human tongue along the base of the dome Jiraiya. No vowels, no punctuation. Just her name in the raw, the way she had once whispered it to him on the edge of sleep. On the fifth day, a patrol frigate pinged the planet. He saw it briefly in orbit, a silver dart too distant to stop him. But the clock was now ticking. They would come. He had to finish. He doubled his efforts, moving between sights, letting the vials hover open. He sang to her, human lullabies, broken and raw. The kind his mother used to sing before Earth's skies turned red. He told her the news peace talks resuming, planets mourning her, monuments rising too late. None of it mattered. Only this, only now, the ash grew thinner by the sixth day. Winds calmed, as if the planet was running out of breath. But the vials were nearly full, 3 of them now, sealed and marked. He knelt one final time in the garden atrium and pressed his forehead to the soil. "I'm taking you home," he whispered, and meant it. Not to Earth, Earth didn't deserve her, but to the stars where her name would never fade. He'd already planned it. A rogue satellite in the Kuiper belt, he'd etch her name into it with stardrills. Launch the vials in a cryo-orb around it, keep her orbiting forever, a temple of motion and memory. No empire could erase her there. No fire could reach her. On the 7th day, the retrieval team landed. He didn't resist. Just stood beside the dome, holding her crown, 3 vials at his belt, eyes red but steady. The officer looked at the ash-strewn ruins and said nothing, just nodded, once. They didn't chain him. They didn't speak. They understood. He didn't look back as they lifted off. He didn't need to. She wasn't back there anymore. She was with him now, gathered, remembered, and soon written into the stars. He didn't return to Earth, not even when his name was called in ceremonies he never attended, or when his family left 1,000 unanswered messages on his encrypted coms. Instead, he stayed in orbit around the dead world where she had burned. Into ash, sleeping in low-gravity stasis when he could bear it, awake when his grief clawed too deep. For a long time, no signal came from the planet's surface, not a single flicker of radiation or trace of life, but he still watched, still ran atmospheric scans every 6 hours, still whispered her name aloud in the silence of the cockpit, as if somehow the windless dark might echo it back. Every record of her people had been erased, first by the Coalition when they declared them a galactic threat, and then by time. The few images of the alien princess he had kept were embedded in obsolete formats, her voice encoded in dying languages that translation A has refused to speak. Her ashes were sealed in a crystal tube beside his heart, dangling from a chain he had soldered to the console so it would never drift away in zero-G. He had taken her particles from the temple where she had disintegrated, her death accelerated by the planet's radiation and a molecular cascade initiated by her own biology. It had been her decision, her sacrifice, to prevent the hunters from obtaining her body and turning her into a weapon. And he had watched it happen helpless, screaming in vacuum-silenced agony as her body glowed, then evaporated into embers and gold-white dust. That dust had clung to his gloved fingers, his suit, his tears, until he swept it all gently into containment. Now, orbiting the ruins of her world, he ran the same data every day, tracking gravitational shifts in the troposphere, tracing magnetic anomalies that might mean nothing or everything. Then, one rotation into the third solar month, he saw something. A pulsing wave across the crust, no more than a micron deep but shaped unnaturally circular, patterned, expanding in fractal rhythms that matched no tectonic models. It came from the site where she had died. He overrode the safety locks on his drop pod and descended, the same way he had the day she perished, only slower this time. The air was thicker now, slightly more breathable. Plants with silver filaments grew in the cracks between the stone spires. As he stepped through the temple ruins, his boots pressed into the dust that still bore the faint outline of where she had collapsed, arms outstretched, her last words glowing in her native tongue against the altar wall. "I will not be made into death." Those words were almost gone now. But beside the altar, etched into stone that hadn't been there before, was a new pattern concentric rings of ash fused into glass. He knelt, took out the vial of her remains. His hands trembled. Around him the air shimmered faintly, and then the dust stirred, no wind, no weather. But the ashes lifted from the earth as if exhaled by memory itself. They drifted upward, dancing, forming into columns, into faint traces of her outline hair made of embers, eyes that flickered like distant suns, a shape more felt than seen. He gasped, reaching out, but she wasn't there, not really. Not yet, and then his sensor beeped. High-density particles from her DNA had encoded themselves into the soil, reacting now to his presence, his biological pattern. Somehow, impossibly, her atoms had remembered him, remembered his touch. Her ashes had bonded with the minerals of this moon. She had become part of it. And now, reaching across entropy and time, she was trying to come back. But she was fractured, shattered across the molecular lattice of a planet that had killed her. He had a choice. Stay here, try to rebuild her piece by piece from what remained. Or return to the orbital labs, trust AI resurrection, gene weaving, quantum remapping cold machines that had never known her, never seen the way her eyes glowed before she laughed, or the soft way she whispered, "Don't be afraid of dying." That night under the meteor storm, he knew what he had to do. He began gathering, not with scanners or bots, but with bare hands. Each glowing speck, each mote that hummed with that familiar warmth, he placed into a magnetic containment field he designed to resonate with his neural waves. He sang to them, songs she once hummed in the language of the stars, in tones that made the walls of the ship tremble gently. Day by day the ghost construct took shape, not a clone, not a simulation, but a remembrance in atomic truth. Her particles responded to his memory, shaping themselves around it. He worked for weeks without rest, lips chapped from recycled air, fingers raw from handling unshielded energy cores to power the containment. She came to him more clearly each night, shadows at first, then whispers in static, then the outline of her hand on the inside of his helmet when he slept. She wasn't alive, not yet, but she was reaching for him. The human who loved her. The one who had gathered every part of her that existence hadn't managed to erase. And in that cold moonlight, kneeling before the altar of ash and silence, he whispered back, I'm not afraid of dying either. Just of forgetting you, the sky above shimmered. And from somewhere in the starlit dark, a reply came soft, broken, but hers. He returned every nightfall to the edge of the crater where the alien princes had vanished into ash, long after the war had ended and the galaxy's leaders had signed papers that meant nothing to the dead, nothing to the exiled, and certainly nothing to a heart that remembered only her. For weeks, then months, then a full turning of the solar year, he had gathered handful by aching handful the particles that had once shimmered in her breath, her voice, her eyes. The wind was cruel, sometimes scattering his collection, but he never shouted at the sky. He knew it wasn't the sky's fault. What she had become could no longer be called dust, nor energy, nor even memory. She was embedded now into the very curvature of space-time. When she died, she became more than lost, she became unreachable. But he reached, always. He had learned the rhythms of the wind, timed the eddies and flares that danced across the moon's fractured terrain, adjusted his breathing and motion to avoid disturbing the delicate sifting of ash that lay in the crater's basin. In a pressurized vial laced with chronon stasis, he had sealed each grain with a reverence greater than any priest could offer, whispering her name Erisa. Alien princes of the twilight species who once ruled nebulae with poems, not bombs each time he sealed another particle. The scientists called it insanity, but they no longer came here. He'd made sure of that. He'd burned their permits in orbit and sabotaged the telemetry beacons that marked the crater as a site of non-viable cultural interest. To him, it was the last cathedral. One morning, under a dying red sun, he stood atop the half-built chamber of what now resembled a tower. Not grand, not ornate, just real. It was built of shattered glass, starlight-infused stone, and minerals formed from the heat of her annihilation, his temple. Not to worship her, but to protect her memory from being rewritten. The historians had already tried. They claimed she was never a princess, that she never existed, that no one could have sacrificed herself in such a blinding way to shield a human from a collapsing war-core blast. But he had seen her step into the detonation. Arms open, her body glowing with pale silver fire as her molecules separated, not in pain, but in acceptance. He had screamed her name into that explosion, and now the silence of this moon was his penance and his sanctuary. On the eve of the second year since her death, he activated a long-dormant beacon, one that he had hidden in orbit. It sent out a message encoded in gravitational frequencies only accessible to beings attuned to ancient tech, specifically her people's original harmonic signature. If any still lived in hiding in drifting star cities or buried beneath dead planets, they would hear it. He told them everything, not to ask for help, not to find redemption, just so they'd know someone still remembered her. Someone still honored her sacrifice. He said her name aloud, again and again, letting it echo through the crater. Erisa, 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 and then something changed. The crater's ash, which always settled flat, began to rise, not in a storm, not in rage, but gently. Like breath, the vial in his hand pulsed with faint heat. He stepped back, watched the crater shimmer, and his heart nearly collapsed. From the center rose a silhouette not solid, not quite spirit, but formed of the particles he had gathered, now suspended in a web of quantum filaments triggered by his persistence. Her form hovered, pulsing like a memory that hadn't fully faded. Her eyes flickered open, not alive, but aware. A constructive devotion. A body reassembled not by science, but by the sheer weight of remembered love. She didn't speak, but her expression held what words could not. Thank you, goodbye, and I remember you. Then, as gently as she had come, she disintegrated again. But this time with purpose, her particles moving into the walls of the temple, embedding themselves in its core. She became the temple. She became the light that now glowed inside its glass. He fell to his knees, hands trembling, heart overwhelmed, not with sorrow, but with the kind of aching peace that only comes from knowing that even in death, love had built something lasting. Months passed. The temple was finished. Not many came, but those who did saw something unexplainable, a structure that shimmered in the dark with a pulse like a heartbeat. lit by particles that defied thermodynamic rules. Pilgrims came, then poets, then artists. Some claimed they saw a girl's silhouette walking inside the glass. Others swore the stars above the temple realigned every night to form a name. The name no archive held, no statue bore. But here, on this moon in this quiet temple made from ash and vow, her name was etched into existence. He never left. He became the guardian of her memory, the last witness of what the universe tried to forget. And every time someone asked him why he built a temple on a dead moon for a girl erased by history, he would only smile and say, "Because I promised her that love, real love, wouldn't need history to survive. Just one person willing to remember. And I am that person. I will be. Until the stars forget to shine."